Welcome to On Cloud, the podcast for cloud professionals, where we break down the state of cloud computing today and how you can unleash the power of cloud for your enterprise. Now, here's your host, David Linthicum.
Welcome back to the On Cloud podcast. Today on the show, I am joined by William Land, Senior Staff Solutions Architect with VMware. Welcome to the show, William.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I was, just on your podcast that you guys do, so I appreciate that, and just really looking to catch up on where this market is going. So, well, give us the William Lamb story. Where'd you come from? What were you doing before you got to VMware, if anything? And what do you focus on in your career?
Thanks again for having me. My name is William Lamb. Actually, prior to VMware, I was a customer, I've been fortunate to work for a lot of large enterprises. Prior to joining VMware, I was at Salesforce running the R&D infrastructure there, which of course made up of VMware. And I've been using our software stack roughly around 2008 timeframe. As I mentioned, I'm a senior soft solutions architect, part of our VMware Cloud Infrastructure Business Group. And I'm kind of focused on helping, working with our customers, product management and engineering team focus on our hybrid and multi-cloud solutions. Coming up actually on 12 years this coming fall. So it feels like a lifetime. And so, as I get to work day to day with our customers or engineering teams and really try to, distill down the requirements and, work collaboratively across our different organizations, kind of deliver, on this vision of the VMware cloud to our customers, whether that's private cloud, some of our partner clouds, and even all the way out in the edge.
So what's the most enjoyable aspect of your job?
Oh, really just talking to our customers and kind of hearing about the different use cases. I've been very fortunate to be able to touch a lot of our platforms, from the core hypervisors, storage, networking, and the management products. And, there's not a time that goes by where I get to talk to our large and strategic customers and really hear about how they're pushing our software stack, our services to the boundaries and doing some really, really interesting things. You don't imagine some of the stories I hear about, where they're trying to run, our software stack, especially at the edge. I did a blog post not too long ago where a customer was sharing like, hey, they've actually got it deployed in a Ferrari. And I was just like, wow. I was just asking like, hey, where was the craziest place you've run the hypervisor? And I had all these customers share their stories. And it really is true that, we have our software stack in all the different vertical segments, you name it, ships, boats, submarines, whatever it may be. And it's just really humbling to hear about how our customers are able to leverage our technology to really transform their organization and deliver their business value to their end customers. So that has always been something that I enjoy doing, speaking with our customers.
Yeah, edge computing makes things more fun because we're not just staring at or dealing with centralized computing, we're dealing with different devices and things like that. I've always enjoyed that aspect of computing. So let's talk about hybrid and multi-cloud, complex cloud architectures. Let's get the definitions out there first. Tell the audience, and I know most people listen to the podcast are going to know what a hybrid cloud and a multi-cloud is, but how are you guys defining it at VMware?
Yeah, it's interesting because a couple of years back, when the term multi-cloud came out, VMware is starting to talk a little bit about it. And, a lot of this was sort of early insights from some of our strategic customers, some of the challenges that they were faced with. And it was sort of seen as like, hey, this is just that next new buzzword from cloud, and we just needed something to talk about. And you fast forward to today, and I think in some of our reports that we've done surveys, with third parties, and I think even HashiCorp published like sort of the state of multi-cloud for the 2023 revision, and it's like 83% of organizations today, have multi-cloud, anywhere from 1 to 2 or more than that, right? And we see a lot of that certainly driven around time of pandemic. Right? IT organizations are going through transformation and they're really trying to deliver certain capabilities and sort of reacting to what was happening around the world and really figuring out where best to put these workloads. And so we started to see that come up for a lot of the larger customers and deploying their workloads there, based on the needs and requirements. At the same time, we have a huge, on-premises customer user base. That's sort of where VMware started from. And over the last several years, we clearly see that it's not just on-prem versus public cloud versus partner cloud. It really is just turning into this, distributed hybrid infrastructure that our customers are tasked with managing, operating at scale. And these are sort of the challenges that we as an industry are faced with, and sort of, how is VMware helping our customers with the different technologies and solutions that we have to offer.
Yeah, I think the common pattern is we're moving to complex cloud deployments, and that's typically going to be multiple public clouds. But also even include the existing legacy systems, private clouds you may have around, and even edge-based systems. So when you look at it, we're kind of solving the same problem. We have processes in different heterogeneous cloud environments and different platforms that we're working with on premise. And that's really kind of the architecture of where we are now. And you think of moving to multi-cloud, people kind of got to multi-cloud, and you alluded to this in your response, was, this was something where it was really kind of chasing best of breed technology. So it occurred organically in the past. In other words, I want to use this particular AI platform, this particular database, and it happens not to be on this particular public cloud provider. And by the way, I need to use my existing legacy stuff. I need to use edge-based stuff. So we're getting to a point where we're going to be dealing with huge amounts of heterogeneity, different cloud providers that we're dealing with. And really, this is something that's kind of moving up from the cloud providers into this kind of abstract space. I mean, people are calling it super cloud, meta cloud, but I'm just saying we're focusing on cross-cloud services ultimately as a way to mitigate the risk and increase the productivity of leveraging hybrid and multi-clouds. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It definitely happened organically. And, sort of what we see from our customers was that, the organizations that was really well hooked into their business operations really understood that, you needed to be differentiated. The pandemic forced sort of overall adoption of public cloud, right? You go from an organization that was 100% in the office to now I got to deliver IT services remotely, globally. And how do I do that, right? The only way you can do that at any kind of scale was leveraging public cloud. And we certainly saw an influx of our customers, overnight go from purely 100% on-premises to now delivering cross-cloud services across their different regions. And how do you start to manage that, right? So we saw this huge growth of consumption of all these different services. And now what we're seeing is that, with the macroeconomics, with the focus of really turning IT from a cost center and really turning it into an enabler, we do have net new challenges like you clearly outlined, right? And there are now new constraints and requirements on where workloads run. One big one that we see a lot of is around data sovereignty and compliance. This kind of has been there for quite some time. And this is where, VMware has done some work with our sovereign cloud partners last year. We announced that VMware Explore. And we're seeing it's not just best of breed clouds, but we're also seeing partner clouds being able to meet certain types of requirements. And so our customers are now saying, not only do I need to run these workloads in a particular region, but I also need the folks that are staffing that to be local versus being remote. And so there's all these new requirements that comes in that just creates additional challenges. And how do you manage this at scale, especially from an operations standpoint? And so cost becomes a big factor for many organizations to take a look at their overall deployment, whether it's multi-cloud on-prem, and saying, where best should I start to think about these workloads? And how do I start to kind of move them around or strategically place workloads where they need to be at with these additional constraints in place?
So you're talking to a CIO and they're moving into a hybrid or multi-cloud environment, complex cloud environment. What are some of the challenges in terms of adoption? What should they be focused on? Where is this market actually moving to from where we are now in 2023 to where we're going to be in 2024 and 2025?
Yeah, there's a couple of key use cases that we continue to still hear. And, these are sort of the bread and butter use cases that we heard in the very early days of multi-cloud. And they just kind of continue on, right? This whole concept of IT transformation, digital transformation, nothing new, I'm sure, to your audience. And we just continue to evolve. And I'm sure everybody's tired of hearing about AI, but it really is sort of that next thing that's really driving, further digital transformation. And so from these executives, they have to kind of think about their overall product portfolio. How are they trying to differentiate? And so we see a lot of customers still in the typical, hey, I'm going to think about modernization across the board. And typically when we talk about modernization, we talk about cloud native, microservices, all these, fancy terms for like modernizing the application. But one of the things that we don't really talk a lot about, or at least I don't always hear others talk about, is like, what about modernizing your infrastructure, right? We have a lot of customers that run typical on-prem infrastructure. This is aging hardware. Now, it's easy to use the word legacy, but if you look at a lot of the processes and what actually runs our overall economy is still running on most of these traditional based applications. And so while it is coin legacy, this is really where a lot of the business value is at. And how can organizations start to modernize their infrastructure so that they don't actually have to manage this hardware, which can be several years old, especially when we had the supply chain challenges a couple of years back. We're only just kind of getting out of that state. And so getting access to modern hardware was extremely difficult. And so we have a number of customers that feel like running data center is not their bread and butter. They want to be able to provide differentiated capabilities. And to be able to do that, you need to have modern infrastructure that can provide developer services, run net new applications, things like AI, databases of service, et cetera. And so they're actually moving their infrastructure into the public cloud or into a partner cloud. And we see that in several forms. We see, the severe or extreme cases, which is I'm completely exiting the data center. So these are typical data center evacuation. And we have a number of large customers already doing that today and running very successfully. And then we have sort of intermixed customers who are doing consolidation. M&A was certainly huge at one point, certainly, especially in the IT industry. And so we see a lot of contraction and even expansion where we've seen some acquisitions just not go through, and they're having to basically divest the organization and say, well, how do I start to separate out these different organizations? And so various forms of data center contraction as well as expansion or even consolidation. We see that happening across these different clouds. So again, kind of this hybrid model. The other ones that we see quite a bit is around disaster recovery. With this age of malware and ransomware attacks, it's critical for organizations to really have a true DR scenario, not just for typical, hey, my data center is no longer available, but when these attacks happen, and do I have a good DR strategy? And so ransomware prevention and recovery is a key one. And then certainly the ability to extend functionality from your data center, especially when you look at folks experimenting in the AI ML space, right? It's difficult to get hardware, such as GPU. And so being able to run an experiment and go out to a public cloud provider, test that scenario, build out that model, and then bring that back into the on-prem data center is another popular scenario that we see with a lot of our customers.
Yeah, I think where you're getting to is something, I've been writing and speaking about a lot. We're looking to put it on the most optimal platform. In other words, and whether it's cloud or on-premise or an edge-based system, even if we have to move things around to get to a more optimal state, that's really kind of the target here. So it's never going to be extreme. It's never going to be all cloud. It's never going to be all data center. It's never going to be all edge computing. Probably never be. And ultimately, we need to kind of back up a bit, understand what those applications are doing, what their performance patterns are, and ultimately where they need to run best, and understand we're going to make a few mistakes. But that really should be the question. And what I saw during the pandemic is that people move really quickly into the cloud, in many instances didn't do the planning and assessment needed to understand the data and applications that are existing on particular platforms, including the cloud. And now we're kind of moving things around, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we see, between a customer who is successful in adopting multi-cloud and being able to take advantage of all these cloud services, right? Because that's one of the biggest benefit is that you're now able to take these workloads, which typically were behind the corporate firewall, and you're able to bring it closer to these public clouds. And the work that we've done brings these workloads closer to these public cloud services. But one of the things that we found between a customer that was successful versus ones that were challenged was that, how much planning did they do? Now we understand that, there's some customers that, hey, I got to get out of my data center lease. It's a colo. And we do see those customers, and we're able to get them out as quickly as possible. But once you think beyond that, it's like, okay, what do I do with these workloads, right? I'm sure, CIOs, CTOs are thinking about, how do I become differentiated? And it's really the first piece is really just that analysis of your workloads. And we have a lot of tools that we can help you understand that traffic, right? Like networking is a big topic, in a typical data center, traffic is typically busy between east and west, and your north-south traffic isn't really exerted that much, right? But when you go to the public cloud and you start to think about hybrid, all of a sudden, your edge endpoints are starting to get stressed to the point that you might not have been planning on. You might have workloads that get moved to the public cloud, but you've got this database that might be stranded on-prem because of compliance purposes. And all of a sudden you're tromboning traffic, right? And so we do see customers who don't do that planning up front have further challenges with it. And then furthermore, we typically talk to these extremes, and maybe it makes a great piece for the media to talk about, but right, I can still recall these extremes in the past couple of examples. We talked about bare metal versus hypervisor. There was at one point that's like, hey, you can never get the performance, running as a hypervisor as a VM. And, we kind of moved away from that. And we do see that there's value in scenarios where you might have to have bare metal, but we do believe, most customers, more than 90+% virtualized. Then we got to the days of, VM versus container, like, hey, everything's going to be a container. And then we quickly pull back and we say, you know what, it doesn't make sense, right? In some cases, it absolutely does not make sense when you look at data services, and now we have stateful and stateless applications, and we understand that there's more security constructs built into a virtual machine construct. There's benefits to containers, and we harmoniously now understand as an industry that we do see both workloads being deployed evenly, and you want to put the best type of application architecture based on the format. And then we kind of did this again with private versus public cloud. Oh, all workloads are going to go public cloud. On-prem data center is completely dead. And I think we do kind of push it to these extremes. And ultimately, VMware is really pragmatic at this approach, right? Is really listening to our customers and figuring out, where are the trends headed, right? And we really do feel that, where we're at right now in 2023 and beyond is that we really are, our customers, right, is really living in this hybrid distributed cloud. And our role in this place is really to provide those tools and services to provide that unified interface so that our customers can get the benefits of the cloud no matter where their workloads are running.
Yeah, I love the fact that you take a pragmatic view of that. So in other words, it's never going to be, if you have a hammer, everything doesn't look like a nail. At the end of the day, you have to understand what that nail is and, get it implemented. Also, I love the term tromboning. I've never heard that before. Is that when curves go up and down? Well, traffic goes up and down?
Yeah, it just goes up and down. Yeah, it's something that, I talk to a lot of our networking colleagues, and that's something that they're really concerned about, right? Because all of a sudden you're starting to exercise parts of your infrastructure that typically wasn't exercised when you only had to deal with, on-prem data center. But once you start to bridge that gap, right, and you want to have true hybridity, you want to have workload mobility, you want to have connectivity, networking is such a fundamental piece of it. And it's not something that is always foremost and you don't think about because it's just plumbing, right? Like how hard can it be to connect point A to point B? But it's extremely difficult. And there's so many different technologies, not only within the data center that you need to intersect with, but there's also different types of connectivity that the public cloud providers provide. And how do you provide access, high bandwidth, low latency? And so there's really some interesting work that, the hyperscalers, along with VMware, over the years, developing different solutions that gives you net new capabilities that just wasn't possible. I'll give you one concrete example. This is a story I love telling because a lot of customers, have workloads that consume a lot of storage, right? Whether it's a file server or a database, right? And typically in your on-prem data center, you don't really need to worry about egress charges, right? It's quote unquote free. So networking typically is high bandwidth, low latency. You don't have to think about that. Once you kind of bridge that into a public cloud, it's easy to bring data into a public cloud. But it's extremely difficult to not only bring it out, but now there's an additional cost that you have to think about, bandwidth, latency, and all that. And so when we build some of the VMware cloud solutions, we wanted to make sure that it was brought close enough to the hyperscalers to bring in all those services. But one of the capabilities is simple as just file sharing. So as an example, and customers can actually bring in their data. And through the integration and the joint engineering work that we've done there, both the egress and ingress, there's no charges for that because we've done some really interesting engineering work at the fundamental level. And so now you don't have to think about egress as a constraint from your organization, which really unlocks our customers to really think about like how best to deliver that application, how best to evolve that application. Because now, this egress concept where you need to kind of think about if you consume public cloud in the traditional manner, you actually have a net new way of consuming it. And there's a lot of these examples where you get to kind of rethink your architecture and new set of capabilities that the business can now push on the IT organizations and deliver. That just wasn't possible before if you just purely looked at an on-prem world.
So how is VMware looking at, kind of the new trends and I think it's going to be huge explosive growth of data requirements just because of the training data and output data that we need for AI systems, certainly generative AI. So customers out there, corporate America is adopting generative AI for lots of good reasons. They're using it as a core base within their business systems, supply chains, things like that. It does a lot of things better. And however, needs a tremendous amount of processing and a tremendous amount of storage. So how are you guys looking at that at VMware?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. And this definitely came about even before the whole ChatGPT and just kind of revolutionized the whole industry and kind of getting everybody think about AI and ML and how that works. We already kind of saw some of that from our customers, right? Like, with the supply chain challenges, customers have been wanting to do lots of interesting work already in the AI ML space and even just general graphics processing, right? And you think about the inability to get hardware where the time it took from ordering to rack and stack was anywhere from 6 to maybe even up to a year, just only a few years back. They kind of had to look into the public cloud and how do I start to do some of the training in the public cloud, right? And compute was an area that they were looking into, and kind of having the different types of compute instances really help customers kind of optimize where they're putting their workloads. And because not every public cloud provider has the same set of regions and locations, customers had to kind of decide based on their requirements, global proximity. We talked a little bit about data sovereignty and compliance, and we still have those trends even into these training models, right? So we have some organizations that are able to take advantage of these public cloud solutions. They can build those training and then bring those models back in on-prem. We have a lot of other customers, and rightfully so, there's a general concern of IP the hallucinations that we're seeing in a lot of these where, it's trained on such a broad data set. And we look at how many organizations are starting to think about AI, and I wouldn't say it's well figured out. We're all kind of doing some interesting experiments, and there's lots of stuff that's happening extremely, extremely fast. But one thing is clear is that, lots of data, lots of compute, lots of graphic processing. And how do you optimize that, especially in the current macroeconomics? And so we do see a class of customers that are leveraging compute and the public cloud to do this training, bring it back into on-prem environment where the data may not be as sensitive. We do have other customers that says, you know what, I need to be able to build this full stack in my on-prem data center. And with the growing concerns of IP, intellectual property, and just sort of context-aware data, organizations are wanting to have AI and ML done in a smart way, and not necessarily like, hey, I'm just going to expose a chatbot and call it a day, right? And to be able to derive that unique business value, you really need to train on your specific domain. And sort of what we're hearing and seeing is that, these models should be smaller to a certain degree. So not in the several terabytes or larger. So there's also a cost implication. And so I think we'll start to see some optimizations for different verticals and domains where customers are going to want to train on their own data set and then expose that functionality, whether they do that directly to their customers or they expose that as a new business model to other organizations to consume. And so I do think on the training front, we are going to see more of that land in on-prem. And, there's a lot of innovations happening right now in sort of the LLMs. And I think even we had just announced some models that we published. And so I think there'll be some interesting work that's going to happen, in the next 6 to 12 months to see sort of where things are going with the training side of it. On the inference side, it's interesting because we do believe that a lot of that is still going to be residing, the compute and the function of inferencing will still reside at the edge. So you're only going to see that continue to expand. We've had different organizations like, marketplaces, food vendors that are wanting to optimize their operations. And so being able to look at, how much capacity they have, whether we're talking about food or groceries, and a lot of the inferencing, the hardware, the gear, that was all done locally, right? And now we're just only going to see an increase of that compute happening there. And how do you kind of bring in all this together? And so VMware, I think, is well positioned to help support our customers on this kind of hybrid journey and providing, this consistent interface, which is what we call VMware Cloud. And I'm sure you'll hear a lot more interesting and exciting announcements.
So where can we find you on the web? Work you've done? How would people typically reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm on a couple of social media channels, but I am also on Twitter/X. That's the easiest way to kind of engage with me on there. I'm also on Mastodon and Blue Skies at LambW. You can find me there. And then I also author my personal blog at williamlamb.com, where I spend most of the time writing about various technologies, especially around VMware.
Yeah, I'm going to run you down once I'm out there. So I'm looking forward to that a lot in terms of the talk and multi-cloud, complex cloud architectures, solutions that are out there. I think that's where it's at right now. That's a part of the market that we have to figure out. Huge growth space right now. And certainly with the fuel on the fire with AI and the storage needs for that, it's going to be a wild ride over the next few years. So if you enjoyed this podcast, like us, rate us, and subscribe. You can also check out our past episodes, including those hosted by my good friend, Mike Cavas. Find out more at DeloitteCloudPodcast.com. All one word. If you'd like to contact me directly, you can email me at dlinthicum, LINTHICUM, @Deloitte.com. So until next time, best of luck with your cloud journey. Stay safe. Cheers.
Thank you for listening to On Cloud for Cloud Professionals with David Linthicum. Connect with David on Twitter and LinkedIn. And visit the Deloitte on Cloud blog at Deloitte.com/US/Deloitte-on-cloud-blog. Be sure to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app. This podcast is produced by Deloitte. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice or services of any kind. For additional information about Deloitte, go to Deloitte.com/about.